Peter Pry's organization, Hank Cooper's organization, various organizations. And one of the big issues has been that these lobbyists have all the money and they can essentially overcome. There's not enough people that care enough, and therefore we need these organizations to be fully funded, such that they have analysts and they can determine who the rogue legislators are that are obstructing legislation, and we can go after them. We can go after their local newspapers, go after their local radio shows, and tell them, that they can't do this anymore.
That's bipartisan.
This is a completely bipartisan issue. The other thing we're excited about is we're forming an Energy Security Council that I'm chairing, that I brought C-Suite Network and Jeffrey Hazlett on board. So as you guys mentioned, Jeffrey with his, extremely strong capabilities in leadership and being a Fortune 100 executive and all his contacts, he's going to help make it happen at the corporate level. And he brings the organization and some of the infrastructure so that there will be collaboration between citizen warriors, between legislators, their aides, regulators, and vendors to try to figure out what we need to do to get this accomplished. So with that, I'll turn it back to Frank.
There have been a couple of questions already posed, and one I promised we would come back to, and I think, Senator Hall, you're probably the guy to talk about the governor and where this looks like it'll head.
Well, let me talk about that, but first, let me just say that God doesn't make any mistakes. And none of you are here by accident tonight. There's some reason for you to be here. And it took me a long time to get that figured out, because God interfered in my life early on. When he talked about I ended up in the Minuteman program as an engineer, that was not my plan. My plan when I graduated from the Citadel as a top Air Force cadet in my class was to go to flight school and be an F-4 fighter pilot. But I couldn't pass the final physical because of my eyes, and I ended up being signed to the Minuteman missile program. And even when I showed up out there, they questioned while I was there because they had a dispensation to not accept second lieutenants, engineers. They only had to accept captains with a master's degree. But I ended up staying. And I ended up, before I left there, being put in charge of the program that was discovered in the middle of while I was there of the threat from the Russians of an EMP attack against our Minuteman missile system, something we'd learned a couple of years earlier. And it meant we were totally impotent in our capability with Minuteman, and it had to be fixed. And I was assigned the project officer, put in charge, and the rest of it was, I had 9 lieutenant colonels or colonels that were assigned to under me. I was junior captain, assigned under me. That doesn't happen, but we got the job done. And when I left the Air Force, I never told anybody what I had done until many years later. I was at an event on education talking about C-scope. And this gentleman, Frank Gaffney, was there talking about education. And during a break, he was on a phone call talking to folks in Washington about this thing about grid security issues. And we had a little conversation about it and talked about the EMP threat. And it woke up some long memories of mine. And I said, gee, that's something I never thought about, the electrical grid, because back when I was working on the problem, electricity was a luxury. But we just talked about it. And then between then and a few weeks later, I ended up deciding that I was going to run for office. I was part of the Tea Party, and I ran into a cohort that you mentioned was in the movie, Peter Pry, and he talked about the grid and the problems of it. And when conversation was around, well, Texas has its own grid, unknown to me at the time. He said, if you get elected, you ought to do something about it. And so I decided that I would. There's more to it of what I did, a little study to get prepared for it. But then I got elected, and as Tommy described, God steps in one more time. He'd sent him back here to Washington, to Texas, to do something about it. And we stepped in the elevator at the same time together. And that launched the whole thing. So I'm telling you, nothing is a coincidence. It's for a time such as this. And so now that you've been here, you've been exposed to this, you have an obligation to not just have been entertained tonight, to learn something, but to actually take this and go do something with it. And what you can do with this is make sure that our governor knows, our lieutenant governor knows, your House representative and your state senator knows that you and all of your friends want this done. You want it done this session, and you want it to be done complete with a program that will actually put us on a path to have a hardened grid system. Now that you know, you have no excuse not to participate in it, because we are a government of the people and by the people. And that's not just a cute statement. It is the way things really happen. So you're now going to be a part of this solution, because when you leave here, you're going to talk to your friends and neighbors and everyone you know and get them excited about it and get them to do the same thing, and we'll get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I trust nobody here thinks this is a coincidence. And when you've heard these stories that the hand of God is on this, and I believe it's to save this country. So I hope you'll take this all aboard. You didn't answer the question though. The governor of this state has taken credit for, I think, 8 different bills that were passed after Snowmageddon, and has repeatedly made the statement that that's taking care of this problem. So this question that was respectfully asked suggests some skepticism about whether he's going to do the right thing if you do get good legislation through. What do you think?
I think that if we get the bill to his desk, I do believe the governor will sign it, probably not with a great deal of enthusiasm, but I do think that he will be hard pressed not to sign it.
Especially if he's felt the pressure in the meantime. Mike?
Yeah, quick question. Everybody's time, this is powerful documentary. This action steps you have are going to be a critical part of it. How long does it take to actually send something to the governor or elected officials?
Yes, the question is how much time it'll take for the individual when they go to the website to click through to send those letters. It's incredible. It's probably less than 3 minutes, depending on how long it takes you to type your address. I mean, it is literally click, 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 click. We already wrote the letters. They're done. And at the end, then you get the phone numbers for all the people that you can call afterwards. So it is very easy.
And I'll just add on to that, because I'm kind of familiar with the tools. It's kind of a setup question I asked. But I just want to say that I've used this tool before for other things, and it will it's a force multiplier effect, because with a few clicks, you can send to multiple elected officials, and it can happen super fast. If you tell your neighbors about it, and they know they can do something in 2 or 3 minutes, this thing will swamp Austin, and you will start to see this momentum happen.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool.
Let me just say that Mike's being a little modest about this. One of the earlier applications of this that he was involved in, instrumental in fact, generated 80 million actions taken through this tool. And I'll tell you what, it gets people's attention. In fact, I was with Brigitte Gabrielle at an event the other day. She, as you all know, I'm sure, runs a great organization, Act for America. And she said that in conversations with legislators, I don't know what your view is on this, but I suspect it's similar, at the federal level, I think, their calculation is that for everybody who actually troubles to take an action, there are probably between 40 or 50 like them who haven't, but who will feel the same way and will act at the voting booth. And folks, why this is so timely, why this is such a God thing that we're doing it right now, is for the next 3 months, there are a lot of people in this country, including the governor of this state, who's actually very interested in what you think. Now, it may not be so much after November, truthfully, but it is right now. So we need to take advantage of this and the tool that David's put together.
Gentlemen, can I interrupt?
Where are we? I can't-
Right here. So
Voice of God.
I have the mic that was giving us feedback. I'm gonna give it to some audience members.
Oh, you're
to
up here.
Ask
Thank you.
questions, right here.
Okay.
Yes. So this young lady.
Will you pass them around? Great, thank you.
Yes, my question is, as precinct chair, do you have this, on this particular documentary on DVD yet? Where we could share it with those in our precincts?
Not quite yet. You can go to griddownpowerup.com. You can make the Align Act outreaches. I would say by the end of August, it will be fully available on the website. We have cut a deal with Epoch Times, and therefore it's going to be available on a pay-per-view basis, I believe, starting August 12th. So it's going to be available on a 2-week basis there. And we chose to take that approach because it's obviously a conservative audience, even though, as we mentioned, this is a very bipartisan film. And we're trying to ensure that the left and the middle, as well as the right, sees this. But this is a way to get it out there. And they have 240 million email addresses, and I think they're going to be, promoting it. So you'll be able to see it on that basis, I'd say by August 12th, and you'll be able to see it. They only have it for an exclusive basis for 2 weeks. And then after that, it's going to be available on our website.
We have some questions over here, David. Can we tell them about my office?
You can also call my office and schedule. We are showing it to groups around the state. We've got about a dozen lined up now. And so if you just call my office and with your group, and if it can fit it in the schedule, we'll bring the video to you and be there to answer questions for you.
Great. Can we bring in the mic down here? What are you doing?
Actually, guys, you don't mind? Right here.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I'm so happy to be here, and I want to say, if it's okay, I'm an independent. And I appreciate so much how you showed throughout your film a range of voices. And can we have a kumbaya freaking yaw moment that we are not left? Did I lose it?
You're not left or right. This is affecting all of us. And we need to come together.
Not as left or right, because we are Texans and we all have elderly citizens who are going to die when this happens. So I just wanted to say, one, thank you for making it bipartisan. And that's the only way we're going to really affect something.
And thank you. Thank you.
One more thing. There is a conservative ladies group that is doing a showing at this same theater complex a week from Sunday, which is the 14th. So feel free. People are invited to that. It's at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
We're over here now. Yes, sir. You might just speak up and I'll repeat it.
I'm also a precinct chair and an engineer, expert in cybersecurity, encryption, and all that. I get it. EMP, hardened. My assumption is also you're doing fiber optic to pulling out the copper, which is also hardened. What about like a quantum encryption for the datacom? Because personally, you can break in with a hacking attempt a lot easier than you can do an EMP bomb. So my question is this an EMP only type of program for yours, or are you also addressing the infrastructure and datacom weakness?
No, we're looking at all threats. That's one of
Could everybody hear the question? This is an all-hazard proposition, Senator Hall.
Yes, no, this has now been expanded to include all threats so that we have a result of a reliable and resilient grid system. It will include physical, cyber, GMD, EMP, physical, and physical, like I said, in there. So, no, we're looking at all threats, as well as protection for infrastructure, not just on the power supply side.
Okay.
Let me add.
Oh, sorry.
The other piece of it, I would say, I mean, it's not just that, it's also a supply issue. I mean, we sit here and look that most of those turbines are where they're made. They're not all made here anymore. We're seeing this with the 5G technology. We're seeing this across the board. For the last 2 years, we've all experienced all kinds of supply chain issues where a majority of our products and our technology has been shipped outside this country. And that is just as much a threat as anything else. And you know, again, I was enlightened by this and seeing the turbines and even sitting with my friend there watching this going, yep, that's it. I mean, just imagine that if one of those goes out, it's 18 months before you can get it. That's even before you can get it. So it's just amazing. It's all those things.
Could I just say on that, some of you may have been with us at CPAC today here in Dallas. If you haven't, I hope you'll come next 2 days. David, Tommy, and Senator Hall and I, and Kevin Freeman, who's not here tonight, participated in a really powerful webinar, which will be available probably this evening at presentdangerchina.org, in which we talked about Jeffrey's point. 300 of those high voltage transformers, I think this may have been mentioned in the film, are made in China. So it's not just supply chain dependencies and difficulties, but we're actually depending upon an enemy of our country not to do anything to screw up something that can take us down. This is not a sensible plan. And especially since we know that those transformers, at least one of them that's been sort of taken apart, has been designed to be used in a hostile fashion. So this is a very present danger. I don't know where the mic is there, right there. Or are we screwing the mic?
Yeah, we don't need the mic.
Go ahead, speak up, Joe.
I would just like to ask, so I've been involved in the legislative session here in Texas, and I know that even when we put pressure on our elected officials, as Senator Hall can tell you, they still don't do the job. So I'd like to know, because I'm more of a action person and not a talker person, if they're not doing this and they're not willing to get this passed to protect our lives, then is there a second plan B of, okay, well, you're not willing to protect your citizens. Is there a way that maybe you guys have thought of filing lawsuits against these elected officials? Because the problem is, when Snowmageddon happened, innocent lives were lost because our elected officials knew about this problem and did not do the right thing. And I'm sick of people talking about it and things not getting done. We need action because I don't want to lose another life. Is there some kind of...
Could I take a cut at that first? One of the most exciting things to me, having been involved in this for a while now, is the piece that David talked about that is, I guess, still being put into place at this moment, but it will be shortly. And that is Plan B, is to go to these electric utilities at the board of directors level, and there are some good ones here in Texas in particular, but there are a lot that aren't. And as Senator Hall can attest, and I think all of us can speak to, you're lighting up those companies, if I can use that expression, is a whole nother avenue of bringing pressure to bear. And honestly, I don't personally think we'd have much trouble with those legislators if the electric utilities were saying, hey, let's get this done, we're on board, let's move it. It's their opposition to it that has caused so many of Senator Hall's colleagues to be passive at best and downright counterproductive at worst.
ERCOT today, $60 million bonus over the last 3 months. Posted $60 million bonus on the last 3 months. Texans have suffered under our heat advisory.
Oh.
So.
It can be profitable.
Exactly, and it's hard for them to back away from that. So your point that they need to
think what Frank is saying is the other part are the power companies themselves. And if they hear from enough of the citizens, it's not just your elected officials on this you need to contact. You need to be contacting your power provider. Whoever you're paying your electric bill to needs to hear from you on this subject in writing and phone calls. And David, I don't know whether it's possible to add that to the website or not, so that you can include the power companies in there as a part of this, and not saying, we want this done. See, one of their argument is, we don't want to do this because it's going to raise the rates on the folks, and we know they don't want their rates raised because we asked them, do you want your electric rate bill to go up? And they all said no. I mean, literally, they said that in a committee hearing. And so we can get rid of that by putting them on your target list also. And this is where the pressure needs to go. And when you're talking about the elected officials, it needs to be your elected officials. Folks going to talk to someone that's in a different district than you live in is almost a waste of time. Keep your focus on those that you vote for and your friends vote for.
Tommy?
Sure. So just real quick, thank you for working in the legislature. We do have one public interest lawsuit right now. Mike Maybe, who you saw, is suing FERC. So we can keep you posted on that. We would love to do lots of public interest lawsuits. We just need resources for it. Before you get to ask the question, I want to thank you, Tom Glass. Same thing as far as being in the legislature. Tom has been in the legislature every single session, duking it out and testifying in support of Senator Hall's bill. So before you ask, I wanted to just thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tommy. Yeah, when we go to the Capitol, what we see is that there's this organization called AECT, I think it's Associated Electric Companies of Texas, and it's dominated by the two big corporations. They're dominated by our CenterPoint and Encore. And I was very happy to hear that CenterPoint is doing things, although I wonder what CenterPoint is telling their representative in AECT to do, because what happens is the citizens go and say, we want this, to our Austin legislators, and AECT goes and whispers in the ear, especially of the chairman of the respective committees in the Senate and the House, that these guys are crazy, that's not going to happen, even though it's the most respected scientists and engineers in the intelligence community and the military that have helped develop this. They don't know what they're talking about. They're tinfoil hat people, so you don't need to do it, and we'll give you lots of money if you'll squelch this for us. That's the way the game has been played so far. What I want to know if you guys know, is CenterPoint changing its tune and what it's telling AECT representative to do, and what can we do in terms of persuading Encore and lighting up Encore on that?
So I couldn't speak to what CenterPoint might be telling AECT. I do know exactly what you mean. The last testimony we had, they came in and said, well, it'll cost too much, and our response is, what's the price of not acting? So, Tom, your point about the lobbying organizations is valid. I will tell you though, that I have seen engineers and executives from CenterPoint at viewings of the film, and they were very positive in their demeanor about it, right? They didn't seem like they were there to, be spying on us, right? So that was a good thing. So, but it sounds to me like there still needs to be more pressure.
And again, just to be clear, I'm sorry if I wasn't. One of the features of this Align Act campaign is going to be to give you the ability, with the click of the mouse, to send to your utility at the board of directors level, by name, a message calling on them to act. And I think the cumulative effect of this, they've taken you for granted. Or they've done these surveys, and it turns out you don't want your costs to go up, yes. But you don't want to die either, whether it's in a snowstorm or in the heat of the summer, because they couldn't make the grid resilient as well as reliable. So this is all part of, I think, the grand scheme, and I really want to commend again David for doing it. I have one gentleman here, and then there are two others over there. Go ahead, sir.
I am in no way saying not to continue to do exactly what they say as far as lighting a fire under Abbott and all the crooked politicians. But in the meantime, we have World War III going on. So getting off the grid, being a prepper, generating your own electricity, if you have to put solar panels on your roof that you own, and secede from their grid. That's the thing that each of us as an individual should do, while we also simultaneously light a fire under the backside of Abbott and all the other crooks.
I don't know if you could hear that, but it was a self-reliance message and an important one. John, good to see you.
It's great to see you. What a surprise tonight. Senator David, I'm so glad you came. As Jeff knows, I'm a Bostonian, but a resident of South Dakota, where we break bread. I was at the Petroleum Club today for the oil and gas luncheon, and I would be happy to share with Jeff and with David. And by the way, I was the only non-oil man at this luncheon for hundreds of people. But I have the entire guest list of the Oil and Gas Society of Dallas, Petroleum Club, and my host was one of the principals in Midland. And do you know what the #1 subject of discussion, Frank, was?
Yes, but tell us.
Their electric bill. Many of these guys had just gotten their electric bill, and they were beside themselves. And so the oil and gas industry, I think you're resonating, David, with what you've done, and they would be active participants in the effort.
Jeff, any thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, if you move past the emotion of everything, this is truly an economic issue, right? And it's about the investment in our future and what we want to have and where we want to go. So, you know, at the business level that David and I are doing on the council side, it's really truly one of educating and then talking about what those things are. Because many of the brethren that we're across the table from are those same people you're asking to have discussions with or on those boards of directors. And these things do work. I mean, you know, I used to be the chief marketing officer of Eastman Kodak. I can tell you that when my chairman got a letter from a customer, I had to pay attention to that stuff. I mean, we did. We literally had discussions about simple letters that would come across the desk and our attention. So this really becomes education, you know, and then you start seeing the inspiration and motivation that starts to occur by that.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah. I just want to add one additional element to this. It's not just the letters, and I think the letters will help, but it's having, you know, these 501c3 organizations and these on-the-ground warriors funded, because what needs to happen is when Bob Hall comes back and says that, you know, these two legislators aren't doing their job, then they can get on CSP, and then it can be synergistic, because we can go back and look at all the grid warriors that we have in our database from that zip code, and we can make them know that these, you know, we can get on radio shows and call those rogue legislators out, and therefore that's what needs to happen in addition to just getting these letters.
Yes, sir.
Two things. Number one, if we encourage everyone in this room and to write letters to 10 of their friends, telling them the problem, asking them to spread it to 10 of their friends, you create a huge mega chain. It becomes a huge marketing tool that's inexpensive, but gets the message out to people that don't even realize what's going on. That's the first thing. And the second thing you mentioned about telling how your, let's say, it's the senators or congressmen, talking to them, getting the word out. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president, wanted to trust bust. He leaked to the papers and said about which politicians were on the tape, and said, well, off the record, these politicians were on the tape of J.P. Morgan, and get that out in your newspapers. And so spreading the word does work. It worked in 13, 12, it works now. You just spread the word, and enough people write to Abbott, to the rest of them, to your local senators, to, Cornyn, to a whole bunch, and say, something must, or the proper actions must be done. Biden talks about electrifying America. Well, what is I guess he hasn't thought about, if the grid goes out, then what?
Or if the electrification takes down the grid. That's the other problem,
They don't think beyond the nose.
We did talk about that in this webinar. If you couldn't hear this very important response, it is, affirming the value of this kind of, what David calls movie to movement, and complementing what the Align Act campaign offers to do with just forwarding your notes to 10 of your friends and encouraging them to do the same, and then, it really does snowball.
Are we talking about just Texas or nationally?
Are we talking about just Texas? I think our focus on Texas was not only that you have Bob Hall and you have your own grid, but that if this actually could be made manageable in a state like this, where you're accustomed to doing big things, God love you, it becomes an irresistible force for the other two grids of the country, one east of the Rockies, the other west of the Rockies. And we're desperate, frankly, for that kind of leadership to be demonstrated someplace, and if not here, where? We've talked a little bit about San Antonio as a city in which this is being worked, and Tommy's been really instrumental, along with several of the people that you saw in the film, to bringing together the community there, the military particularly. They call it Military City because there's 13 bases in that one city, military bases. And they realized, at least some of the leadership realized, that if the grid in the local communities goes down, their missions go down. So they've got a powerful interest in getting this fixed and figuring it out so that their communities survive as well. That's where their families are living, many of them. But secondly, the utility, which is community owned, pulled in alongside, as did the local government. So it's been slow going, but I think particularly, as Tommy has said, with the $1.1 trillion that has now been approved and appropriated by Congress, the money shouldn't be an issue, as long as they don't piss it all away. Yes, ma'am.
First, I want to thank you for the presentation tonight. Great homework game. I am one of those people that does these emails into my representatives at the federal level and at the state level, and you get canned responses written by a staffer. Sometimes I'm not even sure what they addressed because it's so vague and blanket response from our legislators, and I'll just continue to keep your thoughts as I represent your state. So I love that you provide this very simple click, put your email address, your address, who you are. That's a wonderful tool to send the word, but are you seeing action from these emails? Even to make a phone call, you get a staffer who says thank you for your message and moves on. So kind of reassurance here that the communications actually hit somebody.
There's a big difference when you get one letter about one person's concern. Now, our office will respond to those, but when I listen to other legislators talk, when they get 3, 4, 5 more letters on the same issue, it gets their attention. Their response still may be a canned one going back out, but when they say, man, my phone was ringing off the hook about an issue, that gets their attention. So what we're trying to get here is a tsunami of correspondence, emails, phone calls, going into the offices, so they don't get just one call, they don't get two, but they get 100 phone calls, and that, or emails. That will get their attention.
Can I jump on that just for a second? When we did the last campaign that we did, we had senators calling us up saying, please stop it, just stop it, we can't move on. So if we will all actually take action and do this, and it's easy because you not only send the letter to them, you post it on your Facebook, you post it on your Twitter, it happens all. 1, 2, 3, click through this thing, and then your friends will see that, so it's easy for them to do it. And that's the secret behind this, but if you don't take action, you don't do it, it won't work.
Yes, sir, up here.
More of a technical question. The transformers that you're talking about, the high voltage transformers that we can't get our hands on for 18 months. Why can't we make them here in the States? One, how much money, are you talking about $1.3 billion? I don't know why a whole crap load of transformers. Why can't we get those here made in the States?
So just real quick, transformers, domestic manufacturing. What China did is they dumped into the global market something called grain-oriented steel. There's only one kind of steel that you can use to make EHV transformers. They subsidized it with the slave labor that they have to create the conditions in the global market to put almost everybody else out of business. There was one manufacturer in the United States that was petitioning during the Trump administration over and over and over and over again to try to get the US government to then subsidize it so they can keep going. And most of that has all been obliterated by the current administration. So that's a quick answer to your question. We need to keep trying though to get them made here.
Are there any sources in Europe?
There are, and I'd be happy to, like, offline we could chat about the other manufacturers, but that just goes to the whole China piece. They're unrestricted warfare. Sir?
So I have two questions. Senator Hall, the first question, then I'll give the second question too for anybody. When you receive phone calls or emails, do you track them, and can we actually send FOIA requests to your office to find out exactly, oh, Senator Hall, you said you got no emails, but the reality is, once you've given me the FOIA request, you have now disclosed to us that you got 20 or 25. What are you going to do? And the second question was pertaining to this whole thing. ESG is a big issue right now. People talk about ESG for investing. Is there any way to package this in such a way so that if people or companies are not behind this, we could give them a very low ESG score, and that might, influence the way funds would invest in them and stuff like that? I'm just asking the question.
I'll say, take your first question first. Yeah, the answer is yes. All of our records are kept and they're available for FOIA requests. We get those quite often, and we have it documented there. And I will tell you, our office, I put constituent service at the top of the list, and if somebody makes an inquiry about something, we answer it. They may not like the answer we give them, but we do answer it. If it's something we have to look into, they'll get an answer first that says, that's new to us, let us take a look at it, and then we'll get back to them later. And all of that is documented, and it's available, and we've produced those in the past for people that made inquiries about it. To your second question, I'm open to any suggestion that somebody has of ideas or thoughts. This ESG is something that's fairly new that's come up, but anything that anybody has an idea. God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a good reason, and I use them in that order because I'd rather hear from people than talk to them.
Right. Well, it's very interesting now because when you look at companies, they actually have their ESG score with the companies. And I know that's something that's also banks, as far as making loans, that is maybe a factor more and more in the future. So if we could tie these things together and say you've got a really poor ESG score here because you're not doing these things, maybe it's another way. That's.
Let me just endorse what Senator Hall said about the first of those two questions. Anything you can do to get the attention of your elected officials is a help. And if it's dogging them with Freedom of Information Act requests, I suspect many of the offices are not quite as service-oriented as the Senator's is, but this is another way, and it's great to have creative ideas on this. I personally will tell you, I think ESG is a Marxist effort to take down our country.
You're right.
And I think you're beginning to see people push back and you may want to talk to this, Jeffrey, as well at the corporate level, but I wouldn't encourage that. What we've been doing, and unfortunately our colleague Kevin Freeman isn't here to speak to this, though Mike works very closely with him, but Kevin has been promoting liberty, security, and values as an alternative approach, and security, of course, is one of the ways to do this. So rather than buy into what I think is really an insidious effort to compound our vulnerabilities in a lot of different ways, Green New Deal among them, I'd recommend that we use the lever of financial pressure, yes, but in a patriotic direction. Did you want to say anything on this, Jeffrey? Okay. We've gone for the better part of an hour, and I don't know whether that half hour is still something you want to spend any more time on, but I know it's late. Some of us have got an early morning. Shall we take one more question?
Question,
Right
comment.
up here, JD.
When this film comes out and we get into hardening and protecting the grid, it will also save costs because it'll protect against ice storms, snowstorms, hurricanes, all kinds of natural disasters. The power's going to stay on.
JD is one of our duty experts from a little further north in the Midwest, but has been very active in his community and nationwide, and we're really appreciative of your support. And he basically made the point that if you take an all hazards approach to protecting this most critical of critical infrastructures, you can make it resilient not just against the kinds of things you've been hearing about here, but even the kinds of things that, among other things, took down almost in a very enduring way your grid here in February. So a point well taken. There's a lot more on all of this. I would commend to you the site of our C3, the Secure the Grid Coalition, securethegrid.com. Tommy and a great team, including JD and Tom and others, work it assiduously. We're anxious to make sure you have the knowledge you need to be effective, not just in clicking that mouse, but in really becoming part of this movement. And just to go back to what Senator Hall said very powerfully earlier, this is the beginning of getting a problem fixed that we cannot live without fixing. Somebody mentioned, old people will die. According to, as you heard, according to the chairman, one of the most distinguished national security experts and one of those who discovered the phenomenon before they came to Senator Hall of electromagnetic pulse and worried that the Soviets would figure out that they could nail our strategic deterrent, is Dr. William Graham. And as you say in the film, 9 out of 10 of us are not going to make it if the grid goes down and stays down for a year. So if that doesn't concentrate your mind, I don't know what will. But more to the point, there are things that we can do about this. And they're identified in the film. We've talked about them here tonight. There's a lot more on all of that. We really need you to become part of this movement. And we thank you very much for being here tonight to be exposed to it. And go forth and multiply. God bless you.
So Brian Schultz, who runs Look Cinemas, has graciously allowed us to go into the main area and continue to